All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with Source. It's great to look out and see so many familiar faces and some faces that are brand new to me. So by way of introduction, my name is Noah Smock. I'm the Assistant Director for Source. If you don't know, and you probably have already gotten a lot of emails from me, but if you don't know, Source is the Service Learning and Community Outreach and Service Learning Center for the schools of medicine, nursing, and public health. That's students, faculty, and staff. We work to engage students, faculty, and staff in the awesome work that's going on in Baltimore through a partner network of over 100 community-based organizations and service-based student groups. So Source, the philosophy that we work under is that engagement in the community is an applied function of your education, and we can enhance your educational experience by engaging in the community. So that's really why we got this panel together today, and I'll make some introductions here. We have today 4 guests who are an active part of the Baltimore community in diverse settings. Our panelists have a range of backgrounds and experiences, and we'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. Before we do, I would just like to poll informally the audience. How many people are new to Baltimore, say less than a year that you've lived in Baltimore? And how many people would actually say your hometown is not Baltimore? Well, excellent. A lot of the reasons we put this together is to try to expose some of the deeper work that's happening in Baltimore that you may not get if you're coming from somewhere else. So hopefully we will achieve that goal today. Without further ado, I will actually let our panelists introduce themselves. So if you would, just introduce yourself by name, state where you work, the type of work that you do, and I'll start with Mr. Timlek here.
My name is Andrew Timlek. I am a Master's of Public Health background. I work with a group called AIRS, which is AIDS Interfaith Residential Services. There I act as a health educator and intake kind of coordinator for our housing services for homeless persons that are referred to us by different other providers in the city. And we work to provide those people with supported services, getting them back to a more whole life, whether that's education, family reunification, health issues, and so on. And I've been in Baltimore now, I guess, almost 10 years now. So I'm not of Baltimore, but I like to think that I'm in it now, too. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Carrie Borkowski. I am a faculty member in the School of Public Health and director of the Masters in Public Policy program here at the school. I would say I'm not your typical faculty at Johns Hopkins because I don't have the traditionally sort of research-oriented background. I have a PhD in public policy. I spent 6 years at a community college as a professor in the economics department, so I have an econ and policy background, so I'm very interested in problem solving, but I think in terms of why I'm here, my passion is teaching, and I found out about, through working with Mindy, I found out about something called the Faculty Fellows Program, which was an opportunity for me to join a cohort of faculty to learn how to train in the service learning pedagogy. And so I felt like, my problem solving interests, my teaching interests, as well as my interest in engaging with Baltimore sort of was the culmination in that program. And so I've been able to, fortunately, after being in that program, stay with Source and do some other things. So happy to be here.
My name is Stephanie Regent, and I work at the Commodore John Rogers School, which is just several blocks away from here. It is a pre-K through 8 elementary and middle school. I'm the site manager for Elevate Baltimore, and I'm also the community schools coordinator. Elevate Baltimore provides after-school programming for middle grade students, family advocacy services for all families at our school, and then some workforce development things and some health strategies. And the community schools coordinator position kind of ties all of the resources from the community within the school and outside of the school, and kind of ties them all together to make sure that we're addressing the whole student.
My name is Max Romano. I'm a student here in medicine and in the Masters in Public Health program. I'm not originally from Baltimore, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I moved here from California 3 years ago to start school. I had a background doing AmeriCorps service year and wanted to learn more about my new home, so I've been involved with Source in a variety of capacities over the last 3 years. So I've been on the student governing board for Source. So through that, I've gotten to interface with a lot of organizations that are partners of Source, as well as student groups. I've done a Connection project, which is their sort of nonprofit consulting, small group consulting arm. I've done short-term service projects, and I've done some longer-term projects with some of their affiliated organizations. Yeah.
Thank you all for your introductions. I want to make a quick note. We have some real incredible, dynamic, actual people here that represent so many great things that are going on in our community, but it's just a sample. It's kind of, this panel is kind of a point of departure for deeper exploration. What you see today, you'll hear some really compelling stories of healthcare disparities in Baltimore, personal points of view, organizational points of view, but I really encourage you to look through the whole list of Source partners. As I mentioned, about 100 different partners that we have doing so many different things that there's no way we could represent them all today. So this is a really kind of a powerful example of what we offer.
Oh yeah, I'll throw in which partner organizations I've worked with. I've worked with Joseph Ritchie Hospice on a Connection project. I work a lot with Civic Works, which is a big overarching project that does a lot of environmental and workforce development programs. And I've done short-term projects. I've been to Commodore John Rogers. I've been to the 901 Arts Center, which is a small community arts center.
Yeah, walk from Mass.
We must be neighbors.
And that's a perfect kind of example of where we're headed. We don't know the impact we're having on each other.
In Baltimore, particularly in the nonprofit world, it's 2 degrees of separation, not 6. And I can say Stephanie is a great example of this too. Stephanie is an Elevate site manager, which is a Source partner, Elevate, at the Commodore John Rogers School, which is a Source partner. And we both used to work for another Source partner, Living Classrooms Foundation. So the experience that you see here is nice and representative. So yeah, thank you, Max, for doing that. And that's actually, I mean, that's a medical student and an MPH student. And I know there's so many busy people, but there are ways. Source defines a whole menu of opportunities to engage. It can be a 1 day of service. It can be a once-a-week service, whatever it is. And again, I did bring business cards, so if anybody's curious about learning more and engaging with some of our other partners, feel free to email me directly. So with that, we'll get into our actual questions for the day. So what I'd like to do, for the first question, what we'll do is we'll actually go in order, because I'd like to hear everybody's insights. And then for the other questions, I'll just put them out there, and anybody can volunteer to answer. We'll go in reverse order, so we'll start with Max. If you could talk a little bit about whether you're actively in education or actively in your career right now, talk a little bit about what motivated you to go into this line of work.
Sure. Well, I guess I mentioned I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I lived in California for a while. Before moving to Baltimore, I lived in a lot of different places. And part of my desire in moving here was to feel like I was making this my home and feeling like I was part of the community. And I sort of thought a lot about what that means to me to be part of a community. I'm part of a Johns Hopkins community. I'm part of a community of my neighbors. And those are community of people living in the city. So really just sort of developing a sense of place. And what makes me enjoy this place so much is the relationships I have with people. So it's been a great way to get to know other people that care a lot about this city in lots of different capacities. Just sort of broadly speaking. Yeah.
I have a background in counseling. I have a master's in counseling psychology. I went into counseling to be a school guidance counselor. I grew up in a middle-class Black family, but I grew up in Alaska. And when I was in high school, both of my parents were the first people in their families to go to college. So it was kind of always a no-brainer that I would go to college. But there was something lacking in how do you do that. So there wasn't a lot of specific guidance in terms of what colleges were available to me, how to get financial aid, how to apply. So I kind of ended up where I ended up just by my own work. I didn't get a lot of support from the school counseling center. So I wanted to change that, and that's why I went into school counseling. After graduating, I started working with populations that were dealing with domestic violence, substance abuse, sexual assault, homelessness. And that was by accident, but it kind of tapped into my desire to help underserved and underrepresented populations. And so that's kind of dictated my career, from that point on. And so working at Living Classrooms, working with juveniles who were on probation and needed workforce development help, then moving on to Commodore, where, we're a Title I school, which means that over 95% of our students receive free and reduced meals because of the income level of their household. So I really see myself as an advocate and a voice for those who don't have a voice and trying to help them find their voice.
Great. So I would say that growing up, I was fortunate enough to be both a high school and collegiate student athlete. And so part of that experience, not only did I have good teachers, but I had a couple of really great coaches, mentors who brought me along, not just sort of taught me to play a sport, but all the other great things that come along with being a part of a team. And so I think, through an evolution as I grew up, I started to realize that I wanted to do that. I wanted to replicate that in some way. And I think so teaching became sort of a natural offshoot for that. So I ended up, I like to say, I certainly put in the time getting the credentials, but I think luck had a lot to do with ending up where I am. I got a master's in applied economics when I was in North Carolina, and I had done really well in the program, and so the department chair asked me to stay on an additional year and teach statistics to the MBA students, so I stayed on. They had a lot of trouble with stats professors because I guess the students just had trouble, I don't know. But it was a really great year, and so I did really well, and that just sort of solidified what I wanted to do. And an opportunity came in Maryland to be at the community college, and so my family is in Maryland, so my brother was starting to have kids, so I kind of felt like I wanted to return to Maryland. And so the wonderful thing about being a community college is they are focused on teaching, and professional development is about teaching, and so I really got to be around colleagues that sort of nurtured that piece of me. So I got to go to conferences and learn about pedagogy and really get excited and get better at being a teacher, not just understand the content knowledge. I went back and got my PhD in policy, and that's really how I ended up at Hopkins. There was an opportunity to direct the policy program. And like I said, I'm not a traditional, typical sort of faculty at Hopkins, so I really feel like I'm so lucky and fortunate, and some of my hard work has paid off to sort of get in that back door, if you will, faculty appointment at Hopkins. And I think, in the end, what my sort of, being involved in athletics and having great mentors, I think what I was able to transfer, and I see some of my students in the room, so maybe they'll be able to tell me yes or no, but I hope what I try to do in my class is make students realize that regardless of the topic you're learning, it can be fun. So it can be super rigorous, and excellence can be the goal, but it doesn't have to be standing in front of a class and just spouting what I know. We can have a lot of fun and engage together. And honestly, I feel like I learn a lot every day, which is part of the reason why I keep coming back. So thanks.
It's fascinating at the end of it because I can pick up on everybody else's pieces too, right? So I think it's interesting because there's a piece where I fell into my work partially by design. We pick and choose where we want to go, but a lot by accident as people are talking too. And that I was thinking how I came to know Noah and Mindy and other folks at Hopkins was by accident. My boss couldn't go to a session that Mindy was doing. I stood up and said something that got Mindy's attention, and that's one of the things that I learned as a skill that I've developed over time. There's a piece of me that's an activist part, not just public health, but also policy pieces and things like that. So one of the things as I became professionalized, I suppose, is that you find yourself enhancing your skills that you just don't necessarily know. I came about this whole path as an LGBT, QI, et cetera, right, alphabet, sports person, because you mentioned sports, the segue, thank you. And I was like, where are the gay boys in sports, right? And there I was, and so that propelled me to pursue health and look at LGBT populations as underserved, which got me into sociology, which got me into my PhD program at University of Maryland, which one day I'm sitting on the sidewalk at City Cafe and my neighbor walks by who lives a block from the 901 Arts Center, right? Says, do you know somebody who knows HIV education? It's like, hello, right? And so that you don't necessarily know, I think, where you're going to go, but you'll find those bits and pieces of your passion being kind of thrown in front of you every now and again, and I think that's the key. Ultimately, you end up where you need to go if you follow your heart, as well as the pedantic kind of academia stuff too. So,
That's it.
All right, thank you everybody for sharing a little bit of your personal journey. So now I'll just open it up, and anybody can buzz in at any time. So one thing to note is that everything is from your perspective as panelists. We don't purport to have every single perspective represented here. There's no way we could and fit it into a lunch hour. But from your perspective, what are some of the major health challenges that you've encountered in Baltimore City?
I'll just jump right out as outsider for a moment. And one of the things we've talked in Source and other opportunities here is about being of the community, not just in it, and that's one challenge right there, just to kind of engage yourself as a student or as faculty or as a professional, to kind of find yourself deeply knowledgeable of understanding what's going on. Here's one of those examples of, for me, being Canadian. I came into Baltimore and people do stoop sitting talk, right? They yell up and down the street, right, at each other. In Canada, it's over the fence, right? Like a war people, right? So there's a radical departure piece about culture, and then you have to understand that stuff to get to understand what is poverty, what is racism, what is ethnocentrism, whatever those pieces are. And I struggled with that for a long time. I grew up in a small town outside of Toronto, and my parents were fortunate in introducing us to all kinds of diversity. We had people come visit us from different countries, things like that. But that's not the same thing to be living in it, right? And also it's not the same thing to be different than the majority. Being a white boy on my block, right? I've learned what that meant to me, right? How does that play out in my professional aptitudes? If I talk to people, things like that. So I think that was, so poverty as the kind of crushing background for me has been one of the biggest health disparity issues I've kind of tried. And all those pieces I just kind of know living in there.
Oh, I should also mention, we are going to have a place for Q&A at the end. So if you would just hold questions until the last 10 minutes. And by the way, we're not going to answer every single question that you might have. It's a point of departure. You should leave with some questions. But again, we'll be able to plug you into different resources. So. But we will have a Q&A at the end.
I would just piggyback off of that and say, with our students and our families, what we see as a health issue is poverty as the background, and that can mean access to health care, but that also means that when they seek health care, they don't know or feel comfortable with asking the right questions. When you think about when you go to your doctor and they're kind of rushed and you might not feel comfortable asking questions and kind of taking more of their time, imagine that you don't actually get to see a doctor regularly and that's just a brand new experience for you. You feel somewhat powerless and you don't feel like you can ask certain things. We have students who have had various health issues and we've had to go with them to doctors or to the emergency room to help them ask the right questions about follow-up care. One of our second graders had a stroke last year and the mother did not ask the right questions when they went to the emergency room, and so we had to follow up so that the student could get the rehabilitative services, the physical therapy, take the medicine, get the prescriptions filled. And so for us, it's not just accessing, but it's making them feel comfortable and again, finding their voice when they are accessing different health situations.
It's such a big question, sort of what is the biggest problem. So I mean, you could answer it in a very specific way. There's this one law that needs to be changed, or you could answer it in a really general way. And, like, there's structural racism in our society. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, because there are a lot of answers to the question, is sort of the effect of violence on a community. And coming from a public health school, I'm not talking about injuries specifically or exclusively, or homicides and mortality rates. What I'm talking about is how violence shapes how people access services in the community, how they feel safe leaving their homes in the community, how violence is used as a rationale for segregation in our society, how sort of all these different ways that violence plays out in day-to-day lives of people living here, how it shapes economics and whether businesses can open in a place and whether customers go to that business. So sort of just on a big picture, sort of violence, broadly speaking, I think is is a really important factor in how this is how I understand this.
Yeah, I mean, if I were gonna sort of stay on the broader side of things and not specifically name a particular health issue, from a policy perspective, I would say one of the challenges in general, and I think that's probably why, and we'll get to that, I guess, is why I really want our students to be involved in communities, is that the barrier to a lot of success of policy, in my view, are the assumptions that we make about the populations that we're working with. So, for example, I've been doing doing some work looking at education policy. Now, granted, it's certainly related to health policy, but specifically education and thinking about, how do housing vouchers, being able to sort of create mobility in neighborhoods, improve or not improve, educational outcomes for kids. And what a lot of the research is finding is that we're making really general assumptions about how those families will act or won't act in response to those housing subsidies, and that affects the outcomes. And so I think, I mean, the things that have been I drank the Kool-Aid already with SOAR, so I'm sorry if I'm a convert, but I will say that the idea of, and we were talking about it earlier, the idea of reciprocity and the idea that you need to really understand the community that you're working in and with, and not, you're not just imposing something or doing a research project on them. I mean, I really think it's important, the more we can reduce that sort of barrier to whatever health, whatever your issue is. I think that is so key, because no matter how great you are and how smart you are and what you think you know is going to be sort of that policy lever, if you don't know your community, you're putting them and yourselves at a disadvantage. So.
Well, it's a perfect segue to another question, and it actually highlights a really great point. One of the things that I talk to individual students about all the time is we separate things in terminology, like community. I guess so that we can operate on it. So like community as opposed to what? As opposed to me? Like, am I in somebody else's community right now? Is community where you lay your head at night, or is it how many hours you spend a week somewhere? And one of the things that's really important, no matter how you define it, is to understand that even if you're here for 11 months, the MPH track, or if you're here for 11 years, the PhD track, where you throw your trash out, where you buy your breakfast, how you carry yourself walking down the street, the businesses you go to, these are part of the fabric of what makes a community. So if I walk around Hopkins campus and say that instead of being on Monument Street, I'm in Hopkins, and I've got my ID, and then I go home at 5, and I say, well, I don't live in that community. Maybe that's a valuable distinction to make at some places, but maybe sometimes that's a barrier that only I can make. When we break down some of the barriers, actually start having conversations without making assumptions, a lot of that is, the work is just introductions. So I say all that to lead up to the next question, which is, from the perspective of the panelist, talk about some of the real or the perceived tensions, I guess I could say, between Hopkins and the community. Obviously, I'm breaking my own rule there by separating the two, because I don't think they're separate. But in terms of this question and logically being able to operate on them, talk about Hopkins and the community and how that impacts your work positively, negatively, or if it does.
I can jump right in. I've had a specific instance with it was a prospective student at the time. He had done the Teach for America in the Baltimore City schools and was very interested in furthering his education and education policy, and he's doing some great work now. He has real ideas about actionable ideas. And I remember meeting with him. He came back several times and said to me, he had narrowed it to between Duke and Hopkins. And he said to me on many occasions, and he was very serious, if I come to Hopkins, I run the risk that if I wear my Hopkins ID in the communities where I want to do work, that's already a notch against me. Like, that's how real some of the tension is. Now, I haven't, we're all aware of that tension, and so it's just anecdotally, this is one guy, and he's super smart, very serious, very dedicated, still completely dedicated, doing amazing work, and he had real concerns. We had lots of conversations, and I encouraged him to try to sort of, break down those barriers and see it as an opportunity, and we had those sort of kinds of conversations. But it's real. Even if you haven't experienced it, it's real. For a student to come and say that to me and have a real concern about it, about how the community was going to view his work and him coming into the community. So as sincere as he was, and he was already a part of the community, he was like coaching basketball. He was clearly engaged in the community. He still knew that was a sensitive sort of issue. So it's definitely a real thing.
And I'm just there as coming to Baltimore, and I live, as I say, on that side of Green Mountain, which is the not Charles side of Green Mountain, right, the side without the Starbucks side. Right? We have Johns Hopkins Eastern is right in our neighborhood too. There's a track that they built there, but they don't let the community use it. And that really pissed me off because it was like, why not? Well, you know, safety issues or things like that. And so there is that piece that's there, and I think maybe baggage might be a better word than tension sometimes. I don't know, because there's history issues and things. But all of it, it doesn't matter if it was Hopkins. I'm from the University of Michigan, the evil empire. Right, that's where I get my School of Public Health. And so they had the same issue going to Detroit, right? And one of the things I was just jotting some notes to myself here, and it's just when I ride my bike over, think about it too, is like the kind of we know what's best problem. It's hard to distance the structure that's Hopkins as you drive down, you know, Central Avenue, and you're looking at it there. It's here, and you can't escape that piece of that. But it doesn't mean that it has to become the de facto thing that you are when you're out in the community. You can be representatives like we keep talking about this as a way for us to all work through it too. It's like, yeah, I know you, yes, okay, and then see my badge. Here's who I am. What do you need? What can I do for you? I like what you were just saying there. I was writing like the micro moment, right? Being, as I rode my bike, I pick the streets that I ride down. It's very specific, but it's also Hoffman, it's the back Water Valley Street, things like that. I like to see the community. So when you go out on the bus tour, right? If you do that tour, see it. Don't just like it's not safari. Right? Right? But I say when I was I taught about McDaniel, and students were like doing criminology, and they said, "Can we go to the jail?" It's like that they don't want to go to the jail to understand it; they want to go to see it. That's different, right? To experience it, to understand it deeply, and I think that's the way we can kind of overcome some of that tension or baggage, maybe.
Yeah, it's really important that people are establishing the relationship rather than the institution establishing the relationship with the community. The partnership that we've had with Source at Commodore has just been so valuable, just in getting Commodore where it needs to be, from the facilities on to the tutoring programs and different things like that. But it actually is just the people. It's up to us to have the conversations and put it out on the table and talk about it and show that you are not that. So, you know, working in nonprofits for the last 12 years, Hopkins in Baltimore, Hopkins is either the devil or the savior. Hopkins is the evil empire that's taking over everything. But if you need money, you should apply, you know, try to partner with Hopkins or get some money from Hopkins. So it can't be either or. It should be something real, and that starts with people.
Well, I was just thinking a few things. So when I guess to flip it around and think about also how Hopkins perceives the city, what comes to mind is when I first arrived here, I started in the School of Medicine. We have orientation, and we have wonderful. Our first class is taught by Source. Essentially, it's about Baltimore and the history of Baltimore and how health disparities play out in the city. And we do that for several days. We do a bus tour, we do a service project. It's awesome, and you know, I have this real sense of community and feeling part of this city that we study in, and then a few weeks into the year, and then you get off and you're doing anatomy, and you're doing things within Hopkins for a while. A few weeks in, we have colleges Olympics. So this is all the medical students. We all do sporting events and academic decathlon, and we compete with each other, and it's a good time. The site for where they do it is at a local high school, just a couple of blocks, Dunbar High School, and they have a big field, just a few blocks from the School of Medicine on the other side of campus. And they're sending out information. I'm reading my email, and the email says that they'll be organizing a shuttle bus to transport students from the medical school to Dunbar Field to participate in this event. They'll be running the shuttle bus back and forth. And this is literally like 3 blocks. And it made me just realize that while, you know, we're doing, a lot of people in this enormous institution are doing really great work to try to break down some of those barriers, there's still a lot of sort of implicit messages that you get as a student and as a new person here, implicit messages that it's not safe to go 3 blocks by foot in the broad daylight on a Saturday. And then there's a lot of baggage that goes along with that. And then, you know, and I guess the actionable point that comes out of this is sort of understanding that neither is Hopkins some monolithic place where it is one institution that has one set of values and one set of effects on the world. You know, when I think about, you know, a place like the School of Public Health, we can look into the history and we can find examples of actions by people who were affiliated with this place that were unethical. or as we would call them now, unethical maybe in retrospect. And we would also come up with a long list of very ethical things that people affiliated with this university have done. And you know, by the same token, the community is not one community. It's you know, people talk about the Baltimore accent. I don't know what they're talking about because there's a lot of Baltimore accents. You go around different parts of town, people use different words. People are of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different churches. There's a lot of community. So realizing that neither of these things are monoliths, like everybody's pointing out, and realizing that the best way to deal with this whole situation is to see each other as people. So that's where the community service, public service comes into it, both learning to see your neighbors as people and letting them see you as a person. Acknowledging that you may have an affiliation with this bigger institution, but just, you know, we sort of fall into a bit of a fallacy in our reasoning, in that we confuse big groups of people for individuals. So just getting out and working with your neighbors and getting to know them and appreciating them and letting them appreciate you is sort of the best thing that I think I can do to address all that.
And with other colleagues, if you will, everybody agrees, like one of those things is a commitment thing.
Yeah.
In a relationship, you commit to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you commit trust, and you commit to understand and to accept them for their good and their bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that when you're talking about, I'm thinking about Puerto Rico in Highlandtown. I commit to that, to go there because it's the best roast chicken I get in the city. Some people are like, I ain't going there, right? So committing to all kinds of things, not just relationship. I'm just curious what, you know, do you
Yeah.
see similar, feel similar?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, so there's a whole discussion of whether it's good to engage, and then it's the question of how to engage, you know. So doing it honestly and making commitments and fulfilling those commitments. So not over-committing is a big part of that. You know, offering what you can deliver and then delivering that and doing it well is a part of it. Also, I mean, like you were talking about before, you know, letting communities of people identify their needs, you know, is another part of sort of how you do this. So not, like you were saying, not coming in with an idea for, you know, I really think it would be great to teach a curriculum to this age group of kids on this topic in 7 classroom sessions because it just seems like the best idea based on all of the studying I've done. But actually going, you know, finding out what people want and what they think that they need, so you can sort of build a collaboration. So those are sort of some of the ideas that I think about in terms of commitment and how to engage.
And there's some specificity there that, this is my Source plug, Source can help you with. So many times there's incredible intelligence, energy, thought out projects, and what's missing is, you know, we're a point of departure. How do we make the right introductions so that community identified needs can come in before a curriculum is established? And I had a recent example of that actually is now in a really good stage of project at the Commodore John Rogers School that started with an idea, but if the 2 students I met with had done the entire curriculum plan and then come to me, I would have said, well, where's your community partner? Luckily they came earlier and said, who might be interested, who can we have a conversation with? I think that's really important, and I like your analogy, Andy, about the relationship. The relationship includes, when you have a relationship, it's a commitment, and it's also through the bad times, and it means that not everyone's going to get it right the first time. The other thing I wanted to mention about the monolithic, either the monolith of the community or the monolith of Hopkins, we know every day to be untrue. We've seen things that, you know, institutionally we may not even agree with, and on the community side, there's not just one point of view. Also, it evolves. Even if there were one point of view in 1950, it certainly wouldn't be alive today. So without having conversations, you know, we've lost a chance to actually get it right, even if the conversation is a little more arduous, a little less logically easy to operate on. But it's people. They move.
I mean, maybe we're going to get to this, but you know, with limited resources at a university, at a research university in particular, there's often discussions about, so, you know, why should we be shifting resources towards service learning and community engagement? And you know, students have so much to do, and the faculty have other responsibilities. And I would say to you as students and also as faculty, going back on the sort of people theme that we're talking about, you're learning real life skills when you really do learn and understand how to create these relationships and how to sort of connect with people and to understand that they're not, the group is not the same as the individual. And I think whether you're a researcher, a teacher, a clinician, those skills are directly transferable to what you do. So, you were talking about the mother who went in and didn't ask the right questions, with her child. Well, perhaps the medical provider would recognize sort of the need and would, sort of help her walk it back and make sure those questions were asked. And so you as students, and I feel like as a faculty member, I come into a classroom and I have a group of students, some are from this program and some are from this program. Well, it would be really easy for me to make general assumptions. And what I've learned over the years is you just, just like the community, you can't do that. You have to really take the time to get to know students. And so I think from a learning standpoint, an educating standpoint, there are real hard skills, that you guys are obtaining and honing and et cetera, that are going to be transferable to whatever you decide to do with your career. So I would definitely keep that in mind as well.
Well, one more question and then we can actually get to the audience questions. Quite simply, what are some tips that you would offer students as they look to engage in the Baltimore community?
Come to Commodore. I will throw out a plug for our tutoring program because actually Kashif is in the audience today. Riyaz Jalani started the Healthy Minds tutoring program last year at Commodore, and it's just been phenomenal. And Kashif is taking over this year. We need tutors to come in after school. You can see him or Noah for details about that. But the tip that I would give is follow source. I'm not being paid to say that, although I should be. Source provides a really great framework, and it's exactly what Max was saying. Don't come in with your own assumptions. You need to find out what the organization needs, but also feel comfortable. If you're here for a short time, whatever length of time your program is, don't feel bad about the short commitment because Source provides that continuity. So after you leave, someone else will take over, so the relationship is still there. So I would say don't let that stop you if you think, oh, I'm only here for whatever amount of time.
Yeah, I always tell students, I mean, this is particularly true when we're talking about community engagement in Baltimore for folks that are not from Baltimore, but in general, I would say, don't be afraid to ask. Like, don't be afraid to pull aside a professor or email, Mindy or Noah, and just, if you don't know where to start, you got to start somewhere. So create a relationship with a person, because, eventually you're going to get to that right person. And even if, my experience with the faculty and resources at Hopkins is, if nothing else, they're willing to sort of help you branch out your network. And so, as a faculty member, I can't read your mind and I can't know exactly what you want to do in the community. I can't know what ideas you have, what your goals are. And so you have to engage. You have to be willing to engage. And so I would just say, whatever hangups you have about approaching a faculty member or another colleague or someone at Source, you're here to get the most out of your education and to be, as Max was saying, really being part of the community. And part of it starts with you sort of engaging in some sort of way and having it just a simple conversation. I've been so fortunate, I have to say, Andrew and I worked together in one of my classes. He worked with a group of students, and we were just joking that we just keep running into each other, and we've started to develop this great relationship and have ideas. And that doesn't happen unless a conversation was had and a connection was made. And you just don't know what's going to come out of one networking event you attend, one panel that you attend, one conversation or email that you have or send. You just don't know. And so what's the harm in doing it? The worst that can happen is that you're in the same position that you were before you sent it. So you may as well take the risk. So I would say don't ever be afraid to ask for help or to engage with someone.
So remember this moment because your life trajectory just changed. Right from here on, we've done it. If I might, when I first moved here, I lived in College Park for a little while, and I worked at a store in Georgetown, which is in Washington, D.C., right? So I would take the metro, and I was working in a stockroom, and I had to go in early in the morning, and I'm coming to my point about the tip in a second here. But it was the experience that teaches me the tip. I got on the metro, and it took me a few times to realize it. As I was sitting there, I was like, I'm the only white boy on the train. I'm the only white person on this metro. It's like, and in the moment for me, I was to mention this earlier, that to understand yourself as different for the moment or to experience that, deeply and to be cognizant of it when it happens. This is where my tip is, if I will. I drank the Kool-Aid too. This is all sourced
Provided by source.
And so the thing is, we've been talking about service learning opportunities recently and about awareness and reflection. And one of the things we've talked about in the pedagogy of doing it is that there's experience and the hope that we would push you, or you will learn to encounter dissonance, right? Dissonance is that unsettling, uncomfortable moment where you realize something's different, something's wrong, or something's not how I used to understand it. And that's that moment where learning can become available to you, because you're willing to kind of go, what's going on here? What's missing? How come I feel this way about this thing? What could I do about this that would change how I feel about it? Should I change how I feel about this? Where could I go with this? Where would that lead me to, and where's the logical conclusion? So that's my tip, is like, to be aware of when you kind of have that moment like, what's this? It can be small or it can be very large. But that, I think, you can have a learning moment for you, and we couldn't hope for more, I think.
All right, I've thought of a few specific things. So we talk a lot about Baltimore and community and Hopkins. One thing I want to emphasize so that everybody realizes is that Baltimore is an incredible city. It's a city that's faced by a lot of problems that are faced by other cities around the world: incarceration, substances, unemployment. But I found this place to be full of incredibly enthusiastic actors, and there's a great potential and enthusiasm about trying things to make it better. There's just a creativity in the air. I mean, I think the sheer number of small nonprofits trying to do interesting things and come up with solutions is really exciting. So it's a really exciting place to be. I want to make sure people realize that. I certainly find it that way. Another thing, if you're here for a short period of time, you want to have high impact. Really listen to this idea of going where people express they want help, and in a way that they have needs to be met specifically. So sort of the community needs are sort of more important than your needs if you really want to have a high impact in a short period of time, and sort of thinking of it that way. And to go along with that, so the best way to figure out what those needs are and how to plan your time effectively is just to listen. Don't so much come in with your idea of the way things should be, but just ask questions. And this is my wife works in nonprofits in Baltimore, and she works with a lot of students from Hopkins and Micah and University of Maryland, University of Baltimore. And the thing that she always gets frustrated with when she comes home at the end of the day is if somebody came with their idea first without asking a question first. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is that I think community service is a great thing to do as we're getting our education. Many people feel like they're getting an education to have a positive impact on the world in the long run, and doing community service while you're getting educated is an opportunity to have that impact. But really, what I think is probably the biggest impact of all of this is really the relationships we build and the effect we have on each other as individuals. So I hung up some guitar racks at the 901 Arts Center, and I painted some walls of the Commodore John Rogers School. But what certainly shaped my life more, and hopefully shapes the lives of others more, is the relationships and what I learned about myself and about other people from those relationships. So really approaching it from that perspective, thinking of it as more of a relationship-driven process than a task-driven process.
Well, great. And Max, just to pick up on a quick theme, personally, I always say I came to Source first. I came to Hopkins a little later, maybe in my mind. But I came from a community-based organization, and when I saw this job listing as a partner, I thought, I came to Source really because I love Baltimore so much. I wanted to learn more about the city. We have a hyper-local focus. So I say 100 community organizations. Those are all in the city of Baltimore. We know that you guys might be coming from all over the world, but you're here for at least 11 months. We like to do service right in our backyard. When I understood the foundation of what Source was, I saw this incredible opportunity to jump in and expand my knowledge about the city I was living in. The reason it relates to your points, Max, is we have a lot of social entrepreneurs in Baltimore. There's an amazing number of can-do type of people. I think we're right at the cusp, if not in the middle of it. Usually we see things in retrospect, so we might be right in the middle of it, of people working together much more, in a much stronger sense. rather than, hey, I'm a nonprofit, you're a nonprofit, we're scrapping for the same pool of money, we're going to glare at each other at the service fair. Now we're talking about, and maybe it's as simple as where the money comes from. I know the government just shut down, but prior to that, we had some stimulus funds, and people had to work together to get things done. We are in a city that is fostering that like it hasn't in my limited experience, but it does go back 6 years. At the beginning, I would say it wasn't very friendly. I did get those glares at service events. And over the last 3 or 4 years, I see a lot more people working together. So it's kind of an exciting time to be involved in Baltimore. When I go to parties and I talk about working at Hopkins, I'm from the nonprofit community. I could get any mixture of responses. But I always say to people, well, you know, if it's a negative, I understand that exists, but you should really see what I do every day. Like, shadow me at work, or, you know, I'll put you on the listserv announcements that I send out. Just see the conversations we're not saying that we're going to end, but the conversations that we're going to start. And I think it's a different take on what Hopkins is. So I've certainly spoken enough. Let's put some questions out to you guys. What would you like to hear about? You can ask anybody. You can ask everybody. We have about 10 minutes.
I've applied this thing that with for phase, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get any. But one of the questions I had was, one of the things they do is it's actually for primary care providers, and how you would, basically it's an evaluation for primary care providers in an underserved area. And one of my tasks, if I get this position, is if, how basically determining is this community being served as best as possible by this primary care organization, provider, group, whatever. And if not, how do we get this? How do we improve the outcomes, or how do we improve access? So my question was, now I understand one should look at the community, but is there any kind of suggestions as opposed to how we look at the community? Or you know, I'm just trying to figure out, how would you evaluate, say somebody is, like, I've had experiences where many people do not come back to the provider because they feel embarrassed asking questions. They feel that they think that the provider believes they should know, but they feel, no, I don't want to ask this kind of question. But I'm just trying to figure out, how would you break down those, or how would you determine that this program needs to break down those barriers? I don't know.
Like quick stab?
Sure.
In the sense that there's the obvious kind of set of knowledge probably bases that we have, whether it's like a census tract or the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance or all those other things that you can draw on for data. Mm-hmm. And then there's the people that you ask, right? We all know who those are. My experience with Source, I had a student, they pushed me to ask people that we didn't ask before, or to reach a little bit beyond the normal bounds. Again, pushing that limit of comfort and asking some folks that you maybe you don't even think they're related, but you may discover something like that. Because I think you already kind of know what the general answer is.
Right. So one of the data sources they had was actually census, and I was trying to figure out, if this is the census, maybe we should go out to that community's call, pick up a phone, random dial one of the people in the community, say, hey, what do you think about this? I don't know.
I think talking to strangers, like you're saying, is a great idea. One thing that I would challenge you to think about is just about geography a little bit more broadly, and that's something that I've learned about here. I mean, a lot of people talk about Baltimore as a city of neighborhoods. You know, that it's a sort of another way of saying Baltimore's a very segregated city. But that said, people move around the city a lot. So the fact that a primary care practice or a community organization is based in one neighborhood probably doesn't necessarily mean that they only serve people right from around there. So, for instance, you work in a primary care practice that's very community-based in East Baltimore. You may have patients from all over the city, or even in Baltimore County, you'll have somebody from the opposite side of the city. So people do move, and sort of thinking about not just how is an organization. I mean, some organizations are really explicitly place-based, like the 901 Art Center, which we keep talking about. It's an art center in a community that doesn't have a community center. So they draw a line around their neighborhood and they say, we serve kids that live in this neighborhood. If you live across the street, I'm very sorry. But primary care practices, in my experience, don't work that way in this city. So we right now, across the street from one of the largest hospitals, certainly in the state, are in a health professional shortage area for primary care providers. So it's not just geography, obviously. There are lots of health professionals walking around, but it's access, it's transportation, it's money, it's a lot of things.
So
I guess I would make two comments that struck me without knowing, I mean, all the details of what your investigation is. The first is I would make sure that in terms of barriers, I would want to understand better who's determining what are the barriers. Is that coming from the practice, from research, from the participants? I mean, you'd have to sort of make sure that the barriers that are being defined as barriers are actually the barriers and not just what someone is hypothesizing are the barriers, because, you know, it might be, and I go back to your example of the mother, you know, being apprehensive about asking questions. Well, what's driving that? So it might be that you have to back up a step and have a first conversation that says, let's make sure that the barriers that are being defined comport with the actual experiences that the community members are having, and see, you might be able to add a few to the list and take a few off the list. So that's the first thing I would do. I would want to confirm that the barriers defined are actually the real barriers. The other thing I would think, you made the comment of picking up the phone and calling people. My experience, and I'm sure the panel has, and you guys have experiences, I mean, people aren't always super receptive to answering on the phone, no matter how nice and how sincere you are. I mean, the reality is we get bombarded with all sorts of awful phone calls these days. So you might also have to back up a step and go through an education process where you again go to the community or the community that you think you're going to be speaking with, and have a community meeting, have, I don't know, some sort of forum where there could be a conversation about so if you get a phone call, you know what I'm saying? So you sort of preempt, you say, well, if you get a phone call or if you get something in the mail, this is really what it's about, and we're trying to solicit your, response to sort of make things better. So I just think, cold calling like that would not be effective in terms of trying to get information. But.
Excellent. I know that you probably have some follow-up questions and some things, but I want to get a chance for a couple more questions. Yeah, by all means.
So we're all here, so we obviously definitely are committed to community involvement, but for those people that aren't here and maybe aren't as committed to that vision, how do you get those people to see that they have a stake in this community? And do you think that's even possible if it doesn't come from within them to kind of convince them of that?
Awesome. We talked a lot about this in some of the different source meetings and things like that, and events we've been to. It's like, so is there a kind of set of folks who are predisposed to, because they're in public health versus school medicine and so on, or I'm in policy, so I'm not going to come, and it's not important to me. I guess one thing I'd just say quick is that everybody does have their part, and even if we don't appreciate it in the same kind of way, we had some conversations about economics the other day, and I made some assumptions about the economists, right? And I was quickly corrected. But then there's that learning thing, right? But at the same time, so
in a nice way.
Oh, yeah, in a nice way. And then, but the other side, I think, there is a degree to which we have to recognize the politic that's behind what we do, if that's what we're committed to. And I asked my boss, can I go do a state board thing where I could be political, basically. But I had to ask, because it's my professional, and so I want to put them out there. I said, I won't throw you off the bus, right? But to come here today, I have to ask my boss if I can come, right? So, but there's that degree. So as I do this is activism. I'm trying to teach you, and you will go tell people, I heard something today. And you do the same thing in your own work every day to day. I think that's.
I think also, something that I think what I try, or what a lot of people try to do as teachers, and this is particularly important to service managers, you have to meet the students where they're at, for lack of a better way to say it. And what I mean by that is, it's while we want to encourage community engagement and service learning, you have to do it responsibly. And so if you have students that are, and I've had students that that's not what they're interested in. Well, I'm not sure, it's not that I'm not sure, I'm certain that it's not a good idea to send them out there until they're at a point where that's what they're ready to do. So I think, one way to easily reach some of those folks is through classes. So one of my classes that I teach, we do service learning. I put them in groups. It's monitored, it's managed, it's controlled. I try to reach out with the community partners. Now there's always a risk still that that person could have trouble, but at least it's more of a controlled situation. And you have to sort of talk it through. If you do different reflective activities and sort of listen and hear, what that person could bring or those people could bring to the table. And the reality is, as Andrew already said, we're all. I feel like the service is a continuum. We're all going to play our part in a different way. And so some folks, certainly policy students, I don't usually have that problem. But some folks aren't going to be they're not going to be at the activist level. They're going to be, to them, sitting at the Mathematica, sitting at Mathematica doing data analysis that's going to convert into policy that's hopefully going to bring, some programs to the community. They feel like that's their way of contributing. And at the end of the day, we have to be okay with that. And so, I think I think the best you can do is build an awareness so that they sort of understand the folks and the citizens and the communities that they're serving and that they're engaging with. But not everybody's going to be, to the level that we would love everybody in terms of, being activists or something. So, but definitely meeting people where they are in their process.
Absolutely. Framing is important too. It depends, from an organization standpoint, it depends on the goal.
Yeah.
If I just need walls painted, I've had corporations come in. It's always better when people come in wanting to help, but there's people who are coming because their bosses told them to. And I just want my wall painted. So sometimes it doesn't matter, and sometimes you can get someone, to come, they'd rather paint than make a difference in the community. You could still reach your goal. So it just kind of depends on who you're talking to and what their motivation is.
And I was just thinking, like, this whole sort of thing that we talk about, separation between community and Baltimore and Hopkins as a thing. That sort of whole thing is socially constructed, and what that means to me is it can be socially deconstructed, which means that, either by making community service more fun, so SOARS does a great job of offering a whole variety of different ways to do service. You can do it in groups of people. You can do it in short-term ways or in long-term ways. You can do it on your own if you're a loner. You can do it in a data analysis way. You can do it in an education, interactive way. You can do it in a one-time way. So making that fun. Or the flip side of that is, taking your social experiences, your social interactions with your classmates, people around you, and making them, learning opportunities. It sounds silly, but by that I could mean just putting your, choosing to spend your evenings in a place that isn't, a chain restaurant or a mall that's the same as every other city in America, but putting yourself in some place in Baltimore where you get the opportunity to meet people from backgrounds that are different than your own, or supporting a local business, or just sort of exploring this as a city and thinking of that as breaking down these barriers and enriching people's understanding of service and relationships and community just by where we're spending our free time.
Excellent. I do want to respect everybody's time. I also want to talk all day, but I won't. Or dialogue all day. So we'll call it at that for now, but if you have more questions, I encourage you to speak to the panelists with respect to their time. Afterwards, you can grab a business card, reach out to me, and I will do my very best to make an intelligent connection. And thank you all again for spending your lunch hour with us. You have many options, and you decided to fly SOARS today, so thank you.